Generative AI is to 2025 as radio is to 1938. Like, we have had this conversation about the overuse of technology and the need for human resilience and the finding the balance of integration so many times. You look at the expansion of accessibility, of reach, of audience, of all of these things, of radio in the interwar years, and you look at what that meant for malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, information operations, spy networks, all of these things, military planning in Europe and around the world. You look at how the BBC navigated this, and you're like, oh God, I'm gonna just change every time you see radio, put in the word deepfake or generative AI and call me after you've had a Xanax. It'll take, 10 minutes. That's what we're happening right now. That's where we are.
Welcome back to Navigating Noise. I'm really delighted today to talk to Maggie Feldman-Piltch. I believe there's also a Piltch association with Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we're based here. The reason why I was really excited about talking to you was I was told that you are the person helping people make sense of national security. And particularly, you have a very strong and clear voice towards millennial women on it. So I thought that was really cool. And also, we share quite a lot of interest and some background in the info operations space. And so this seemed to be like, hey, let's get together, let's talk about this. But before we get going on that, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you, about your background, how you got to this place of being the person making national security make sense?
I mean, I can try. I think it's just like a conglomerate of poorly placed decisions, right? Of warming myself by the dumpster fire of my life. No, I mean, the long and short of it is that I read a Vanity Fair article more than 20 years ago, maybe almost even 25 years ago. So I was not yet a full working adult at the time. And the article was about counterfeit handbags and how these bags were made, actually, in New York City, and that these bags were made by people here in the United States who were brought here kind of sort of against their will, right? Like they were trafficked here, or they came basically via organized crime networks, mostly based in China, some with connections to the Chinese Communist Party, others just promising people who wanted to leave communist China for a more free life, an opportunity to do that, and instead, forcing them to live in basements and so counterfeit designer bags. So I read this article in Vanity Fair, and I was like, that's bad. No mediocre purse is worth that. And so I sort of thought, great, I'm going to work in what it was then, and I think still is called CSR, right? So, corporate social responsibility. I think we still have this for luxury consumer brands. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And then, like all people of my ilk, you can decide what that means. I went to a really lovely small liberal arts school called Wesleyan University. I'm very, very proud to have gone to Wesleyan. It is an important place to me. So anytime I get a chance to mention it, I do. So I went there for undergrad. It was a university major. I wrote my undergraduate thesis effectively calling for a world government. The Iranians love to download this to this day. It's really funny. You can find it. It's still on the internet. And during that process, I figured I'd move to DC when I graduated and take a couple of years before applying to an MBA program. I never applied to the MBA program. I started working at a national security nonprofit research organization, and it's been more than a decade. So I'm here now. I'm stuck here. These are my life skills. I cannot change who I am. I wouldn't want to either. I love Washington, not just because I'm a national security nerd, but it's a really wonderful city. But I think that's where the seed kind of started. This is a different answer maybe than the one you were expecting. But it's the answer I wanted to give you, so it's the one you're getting.
But okay, I mean, this is interesting. There's like, so after I graduated college, I basically, was like attracted to DC, and like my professional life is kind of like circled around it. My sister's life is circled around LA. And I've often wondered what it is about the city itself. Not that and if there is something about there in DC that kind of like pulls people in. What would you do you think it's like it's do you think it's just like is it just simply that like we wanted to go be where power was? Or was
Oh,
it
it is
there's
so not
something
about the power for me.
yeah, so like what is it beyond that?
Um, so for me, like my life is here, right? What I mean by that is like the people I love are here, or a lot of them are. I have a community here. I don't have to drive if I don't want to. I walk everywhere. DC is by US standards an incredibly walkable city. There's public transportation. There are tons of free museums. There are interesting people from all over the world. We have parks of varying shapes and sizes. Like Washington, D.C., regardless of the US government, uh, is a beautiful city with an incredible history. Beautiful communities. I mean that both in a physical and visual sense, and also in kind of a more nurturing sense. Like, this is my home, and people will pry it from me for my very cold, very dead, well manicured hands. Um, yeah, like this is my place. And there's something that actually deeply irritates me when people talk about DC purely through the lens of like, oh, it is this, locus of power, or like this is about politics. Like, first of all, my life has nothing to do with politics, which is not to say that politics does not impact my life. It impacts my life in the same way, frankly, at least I think, as almost every other American. But like, I don't live in the political realm. um I know probably more about Capitol Hill than the average American, but mostly because like it's a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. Like, people refer to Capitol Hill as if that is a building. It is not. It is a neighborhood. Great food over there. One of my favorite sandwich shops is over there. Yeah, so like this is a real place, right? There are people who are born and raised and die here after living very, very long lives. We have a local culture. We have things like mambo sauce and go-go music.
Yeah.
I don't know, like my dog was born here.
Well, if for no other reason than that,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
great city. Yeah, I guess I was thinking. I mean, I've been one of these people that probably you know you loathe to some extent, like come in, leave, and kind of do that. But I
You
think
don't
like one thing
understand
that
us.
stuck exactly. I might be I'm part of the problem here,
Hmm.
um, but
I'm so glad you know that.
it's a good time to open up about. Um, but the one thing that I've found actually, like, missing in a lot of places that's actually there in DC, and this surprises people when I tell it to them, is, like, it's actually a really robust intellectual culture. Actually a lot of very interesting people who are really, like, broad thinking about things, like, it's hard not to find someone when you go to, like, a dinner party there that isn't, like, very interesting to talk to. Like, you can find some really boring dinner parties in New York. You can find them in
Yes,
LA. You can find them
yes.
out
You
everywhere
can find
around the
them
world.
anywhere. I mean, I think whether or not the dinner party is boring has just as much to do with you as it does with everyone else there. Because like, there's always the chance that it's you. Um, so rule number one is like, don't let it be you. Um, I think one of the things that helps me lead a happy life, and frankly makes me pretty damn good at my job, not pretty damn good, but among the best in the world at my job, is that um, there's almost nothing in this world I can't find a reason to be interested in. Right. I don't need everybody else to necessarily understand or care about why I'm interested in it. And that extends to human beings too. But I do agree with what you're saying that generally speaking, Washington, D.C. is filled with interesting people. Um, and that is for a lot of different reasons. And interesting here is not a euphemism for like bizarrely well traveled, whatever. Um, I'm thinking about like in, one of my closest friends who has done my hair since I moved here. Um, I was just starting out. She was just starting out. Now she owns her own salon. She's incredible. Um, we're generally about the same age. She's one of the most interesting people I know. She's born and raised for the most part in this area. Is she like the ambassador from Zimbabwe? No, but she's one of the most interesting human beings to me. And she does the hair of like not the ambassador to Zimbabwe that I'm aware of, but a version, right? So like, I don't know. I just think people read a lot here. Like our idea of a good time is like there's a lot of free outdoor music that happens. Like there's jazz in the park, which happens like at the Smithsonian. So you're just around um you have to you I heard somebody say once that, the physical city is laid out very similar to New Orleans and Paris, right? L'Enfant designed the city. We're in quadrants. If you're from New Jersey, you are familiar. We have lots of circles, lots of rotaries. So you have to actually like pay attention to where you are walking, the physical plant of the place. And that makes people interesting because you have to pay attention to what's going on around you or you'll get hit by a car.
Or now cyclists are everywhere as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We also do like we have a lot of cyclists, some electric like e-bikes, and then we also
Mm.
have like the
Those
scooter
can be
thing.
dangerous.
Yeah, those super dangerous. I'm a like two leg girl, I like my legs where I can see them and feel them touching the ground.
So what you've done in a lot of cases that I've seen is you've done a really good job of communicating into people's lives there. To what extent has it been really helpful for you, or do you think about it this way, or and tell me how you think about it rather? The that you live in a place and can like look around, see things, meet things, and you absorb your environment in something, and that's how you kind of like help communicate into others. Imagine them in places. There, I mean, I ask this because this is sometimes like when we're working with info operators, we're trying to like remind them, like, oh, these people live in context. They're not just like accounts online. You've got to like understand the broader life.
Unless they are in fact just accounts
Well,
online,
some of
which is
those,
like some of them are not real.
some of them
So
bots, of course.
so
Yeah.
so
If that
here's what I'm gonna
you
say to
think your
you.
mission is to communicate to bots, that's an
Y-
interesting question.
Yeah, like that's it. So that's different. Like let's do the first question first, the second question second. Um, and I will answer the first question first with a caveat or something. If you have to explain to an information operator that people live in context, they are not an information operator. They are someone who is doing an information operation. Like I there's a certain amount of like learning and training that happens and then there are people and then there's an amount that you are just born the way that you are born. I was born the way that I was born. The way that I exist in the world is the way that I exist in the world. My brain has worked, you know, the same way the whole time. Has it been refined? Absolutely. Am I more conscious of it? Totally. God willing, right? Like you live, you get better at it. Um, but yeah, like that, I I'm not a linear thinker. I've never been. And you you can either be mad about that, you can try to force yourself to be one, or you can say, this is how I understand the world. How do I make the most of that? Right? Option three, I think serves everyone best. And by everyone, I mean both those who are asking themselves that question and everyone around you, right? Because the first two, you're just going to be sad. Um, and, I have a mentor who has played a big role in my life. And we were having a conversation once, and he had this look on his face. We were having, because these are the conversations I have with people. This was maybe, gosh, not quite 10 years ago, but close. So it was like long enough ago that at a certain point, it was still like almost a novel question. And the question was like, what happens if China invades Taiwan? What does the US do? Right. Like, again, this is almost 10 years ago. So it wasn't a completely novel question because, like, that West Wing episode is a while ago, but like, it was not, any given Tuesday. Um, and we were talking out the scenarios, and I was gaming out what I thought would happen versus what I thought should happen and all these things. And he had this look on his face. And after I finished, he just exhaled and looked at me and he goes, and he lives in DC, and he said, so many people in this town are a Monet, and at best they're a Van Gogh, but the inside of your brain is entirely a Jackson Pollock, and I am so glad that you are okay with that. Right? He said that to me, and he's right. Like, that whole statement is accurate. So the longer answer to your first question is like, yes. That is true. It is not intentional. It is merely the only way I know how to be. Um, and that is relevant for dealing with bots too, right? Because they don't have the context in the same way. They have context, but it's somebody else's context that was given to them not all the way and mechanically.
Yeah. It's, next word prediction type context. It's not actual context.
If they're lucky, it's not prediction. I call it guessing, right? Because prediction, there's more arithmetic, there's more actuarial reasoning that's happening, and I'm not doubting that some of these accounts and mechanisms are getting to that point, but the human mind, there are so few people on this planet that can weave together the context, right? The qualitative and the quantitative, is required to do accurate predicting and then train it into a bot. That, like, I'm not convinced a bot can do it yet, and I'm sure it will come one day. I'm still very confident that, like, there are things I can and will always be able to do better than a bot. And like, if I fight a bot in the street, I'm not going to fight a bot by pretending to be a bot. I'm going to do what I'm good at, and the bot's going to try to do what it's good at, and I'm going to be better at what I'm good at than the bot is at what it's good at.
See, this is interesting that you brought this up. And I was like, go to these, like, sometimes these roundtables that think tanks in DC put on, and they're like the national security
And in
bureau.
Boston,
And in
people do
Boston,
it in Boston
we
too.
we do it in Boston, but I seem to just sit at these tables more in DC than here. Um, and they and like one thing there was like, okay, like how is like technology transforming national security? That's like those are the types of questions like I often find and that's cool and it's really interesting. Those are great, like important questions we should be talking about. But like think like the last few times, like my answer has been like actually we need to be paying attention to the way it's like the analog world is persisting, the like human like world, these like things that are like really highly resilient out there, and ways in which like humans are also super clever at like getting around and managing this. And I think there's like been this like weird focus in on the technology that's like divorcing it from the actual like human cultures that like where it's operating in all the time, such that like actually and it like I think you're absolutely right. Like the response to a bot is actually the most successful one is normally actual human like engagement with
Right.
it, because it starts to lose sense
It
because
can't do that
we don't make
because it's
sense
not
of
a
the thing. Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And like that's actually
Yeah.
like one of the things about like if we want to have resilience going forward, we're going to have to also figure out a way that like humans become more part of the process and less like in that like just the machine version of everything, which is the temptation right now in some circles, is to kind of like automate our way out of some problems.
I mean, I agree with you that I agree with segments of what you're saying, um, separately. So, right, I don't want to start at the end and go backwards because I don't know that it will be helpful, but let me try it anyways. So, um, in there's a version of the universe happening in the United States and elsewhere where automation, over automation, some might say, is the conversation. Um, that doesn't match the reality of what is occurring in government, right? We are living through a time in which, and we are seeing an attempt at applying that automation into government, and the result is the accidental dismissal of hundreds of nuclear scientists, right? Like there is a reason that the Department of Defense and the national security apparatus and other parts of government um, have not, and God willing, will not blanket accept some sort of technological thing as the answer to anything, right? Like there is no one answer. So I think that there are institutions here in the US and in DC and in capitals around the world, anywhere where institutions must do their jobs, um, anywhere in which there are human beings that recognize bureaucracy is not actually a curse word. It is merely a noun. Bureaucracy is not inherently evil. It is a thing that we actually kind of need. More on that later. Um, one of the starkest, most irritating to me criticisms for a long time of the like quote tech innovation bunch, right, has been, and you see this in like the defense tech, defense startup world, is like more tech, more. I'm like, no, no, different tech, maybe. um like they're fighting this fight of like the Pentagon won't integrate my widget or my processes of widgets, and I'm like, oh my god, I so don't care about this, because I remember like somebody was really proud of their thing that made it possible. They felt it made it possible for pilots of single, basically like fighter pilots to pee while they were flying, and they were about to like install this in all these aircraft, and then they realized that it only worked if you had a penis, because they had not included anyone who didn't have a penis in the
Yeah.
designing of this thing, and had forgotten that there are people who don't have penises that also fly aircraft for the United States government and otherwise, right? And I was like, that is so fucking stupid. So take your technology and shove it so far up your ass that I never see it again. I just don't, I do not want, get me a printer that works. I also think that like I often hear, and maybe this has to do with the different communities and circles I travel in, like, oh my gosh, it's 1928, it's 1929, it's 1934, it's 1937. And there are moments where I'm the one saying that. And in this conversation, I'm the one about to say that. Um, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, like generative AI is to 2025 as radio is to 1938. Like, we have had this conversation about the overuse of technology and the need for human resilience and the finding the balance of integration so many times that, like, I'm dying to know whomever made the first lighter, what did that mean? Like, were they just worried that like arson would go crazy, right? If it was so much easier to start fire, would we burn everything down? That's this question. We've been asking this question since we had fire. The fire has changed slightly, but you look at the expansion of accessibility, of reach, um, of audience, of all of these things, of radio in the interwar years, and you look at what that meant for malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, um, information operations, spy networks, all of these things, military planning in Europe and around the world. You look at how the BBC navigated this, and you're like, oh God, I'm gonna just change every time you see radio, put in the word deepfake or generative AI and call me after you've had a Xanax. It'll take, 10 minutes. That's what we're happening right now. That's where we are.
Yeah, this is often like referred to in a lot of ways. So one of our co-hosts of this podcast, Peter Pomerantsev, kind of wrote a book around like the use of that in World War II, particularly the British kind of info operations in Nazi Germany. And I guess, I think there's
But
like
what
a
about the
lot.
other way around? What about the Nazi, did he talk about the Nazi radio, use of radio, like Lord Haha? Because that's what I'm thinking about.
He definitely like mentioned that, but the focus was on actually like how this one figure like actually like there was successful like the political executive that Britain had and that like waged an information war was actually quite successful.
Absolutely. And it was in response to this one of these two figures, right? So there's Tokyo Rose, which was not actually one individual. But Lord Haha was one guy. It was a British guy who left the UK and went to Germany because he was a fascist and he wasn't getting what he wanted in the UK, right? And his name was obviously not Lord Haha, but he made a persona and they broadcasted it into the UK. But anyways, I this is a particular many more Americans are aware of Tokyo Rose, because many of the women who played Tokyo Rose were actually jailed. Um, not the same, not as many women, not as many people are familiar with Lord Haha, and I really like it is important to me that people know about this guy. So that is my plug. Anyways, as you were
Yeah.
saying.
So but the one thing that like and so this is like talked about often. It's like, oh, we're at this like moment where like propaganda, information war is kind of shifting around it. Except that there aren't a lot of examples of generative AI being really successful right now in
That you were
propaganda.
aware of, yeah.
Yeah, that like we just don't like see them. Like we saw, like we can now see in retrospect an awful lot of radio because it was really like a popular cultural movement on it. And I'm kind of wondering in what ways are they going to be different? And I think like it's very helpful at times to sort like find historical analogies and things like that.
Yeah, but I have to push back on the premise though, right? Because I think you have to more clearly, at least to me, define success, right? Because first of all, we're dealing with a much larger population just on the planet now than we had then, right? And if you are trying to convince a whole country of something, yeah, maybe generative AI is not there yet. But if your goal is just to get five guys who, newly have access to internet because they're from North Korea and now they're fighting with the Russians and they've never seen the internet before, maybe generative AI is working really, really well. And maybe the impact of that generative AI has is what would be the polite way of saying this? Um, Groundbreaking for the West's understanding of North Korea, right? Maybe that's true. We don't know yet. I think this is one of the things that I think is actually most important when we're talking about information operations and information warfare is the definition of audience and the definition of success is not the same now. Because to your point, like, yeah, there are ways in which it is different, but part of the way that it is different, or part of the way that maybe it's unfair, or whatever you want to call it, is like it could be just as successful if we aren't focusing on a whole country, right? Micro targeting. People think micro and think small is not important because they have some preconditions about size and efficacy. I don't know if they didn't go to health class, but size only matters to a certain point if you know what you're doing.
I mean, I guess the conversations that I've had is far more important. The micro targeting and localization of it. I think that like at least the conversations I've had and like where like Filter Labs work is kind of engaged because we do like localize stuff. Like we're not like saying like, oh, we're gonna help you like reach all this. We think like, well, that's like there's just too little that holds them all together as an audience at the national level that it doesn't make sense. However, I guess whereas like where where I'm finding like really interesting bits is like there's this middle tier between like that micro targeting, like this individual on it. And that seems to have like great success to some extent when you're trying to sell them a product on it. And but when you're trying to like get them to like sell them an idea, a concept, something along those lines, there has to be some group element in it, on it, and such that because we're reinforcing beliefs of each other, there's conversations that are happening offline, and so I guess there's kind of like a mezzo level and of it that's kind of intriguing me most as like the place where like, but it's hard because like what we think about these large aggregates of individuals, which are kind of like maybe they're at the national level or these individuals, there's something, but like how do we get at these groups, because we receive and process information really in communities on it.
Yeah, I think it also depends on how you define community, right? So, for example, this one is quite fresh in my mind. It's something I'm working on right now. Um, One of the things that I do is I work with content creators, whether it's one-on-one or you're making toolkits with them. Uh, and these content creators, some of the content creators I work with, have had interactions, one-on-one interactions with Russian military and North Korean military. And we've made toolkits, because they're having those interactions, to use those one-on-one interactions as an opportunity for information gathering and to plant seeds of ideas. And it's been pretty effective. It hasn't been very long, but we're seeing some really interesting outcomes. So that's like one kind of like, I don't want to go too much into detail on that right now, just because it's very early. Um, but like that's been really exciting. The other thing I will say is like, again, going back to this idea of how do you define community, um, how you define community comes down to how your audience defines community. Like rule number one of information, it has literally nothing to do with you. It's not about you. If you want it to be about you, you need to get a different line of work, right? So, one of the audiences that, as you mentioned, that I focus on a great deal is millennial and cusper women. Why? Really two reasons, three reasons, but one, it is a demographic that adversaries to democracy and freedom are putting the most of their resources into, broadly speaking, right? China and Russia, Iran and North Korea, a ton of money, time, content, etc., into targeting these women. Um, Two, I'm a millennial woman. I may not be on the cusper side of the Gen Z piece, but I'm a millennial woman. And so, like, I have some street cred there. And then three, generally speaking, we know that there's both a connection and a correlation between the engagement of women in a society, in a democratic society, and the health of that democracy. So it's a useful leverage point for me. Um, Broadly speaking, I have some like ideas about how I define community and how women in this demographic define community. And then the more specific I get about who I'm trying to communicate with, the more specific that definition gets. And then the more specific I am and who I'm going to. So, for example, I mentioned my friend who does my hair, who's been doing my hair for more than a decade. She owns her own salon now. So she has a community of other women that are learning from her and have watched her grow across social media. And she's a big part of my life. And similarly, these women that watch her, that run their own salons or are growing in somebody else's business, have women just like me all over the country who have a really like intimate relationship with their colorist. So who do I go to when I want feedback or when I want to share an idea, or when I want to learn what's going on? I go to Justine. Justine has like is the best focus group on the planet. Um, and those conversations, interestingly, like happen. It's t- it's a lot of one-on-one, or it's like groups of five or less.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think that's you touch on something that's like almost ineradicable about like human experience on it, with some very like outlier-ish exceptions. And what kind of also makes the line of work, like leveraging technology to understand communities, very, very difficult, if not impossible at the end of the day, is that like we're always cross-cutting these segments, and we do it ourselves, whether it's because of virtue of like you get your hair dyed, or or something like that. I'm a part of like an outdoorsy type community, like we go like backcountry skiing together, and you wouldn't expect who that is, or cycling or something like along those lines, right? Like you're not going to like look at me at my job title and my online behavior and be able to figure out like, okay, and these are the people who are like most influential, and if I get this like network node going, then I'm going to have secure information and be able to like persuade this node. And like that's actually the way I think a lot of people think and work in this space, principally because people, and I'm going to like say something like probably not accurate because it's too broad brushstrokes, but I believe it anyway. In it is that like the elites are kind of actually the ones with like most like a very homogenous social circles, and such that like they're actually like their online activities actually are pretty similar to their offline like communities. This is what they are. We're like, but there's a lot of people out there that like will traffic in and out of a lot of different types of discourses and a lot of different types of
There's a
relationships.
lot of people who just lead normal human lives
Yeah,
and are
and
not
that's the
robots.
norm. That's the norm,
Yes,
not us, kind of thing.
right. Well,
Yeah.
so speak for yourself on that one, because there's a lot of things that I get my hair dyed if people can't figure that out. And they have full colored vision, like that's a separate issue. But I think part of what makes me really good at my job is that because every on the one hand, everything you just laid out is super linear, and that's not how my brain processes information at all. I would never think to approach things this way. Does that mean that there are certain things I miss? Absolutely. That's why you have teams and colleagues and coworkers. But that's just not how it works for me, right? That's not how I think about these things. Um, there's also an enormous gendered component to this. The way that women's communities and social networks, formally and informally, are structured, there's very little resemblance to men's. And I say that as someone with 9 brothers. Okay. There are an overwhelming number of men in my life as compared to women on a personal level. And the way that information sharing, processing, gathering happens is different. That is reinforced by a society that continuously places the responsibility for emotional labor and familial labor on women, right? Who finds the doctor's office? Who remembers when you need to book for the vacation? Who knows when people's birthdays are, right? Whether you are in a partnership or not, um, women are raised in a society, a global society, but particularly in the United States, where the expectation is that we will be doing those things, right? It's modeled for us, and it is modeled for us overtly and covertly, right? The kind of personality traits we reward women for, um, perceived or shown empathy, all of these things, right? Reinforce this idea that then is a product or byproduct of how we communicate and share and distribute information. And what shocks me continuously is really two things. One, online and in real life, but especially online, it's very easy to see online. Continuously, very, very little content moderation goes on in spaces that feel like they're supposed to be for girls. Two, overwhelming majority of resources by adversaries, foreign and domestic. And by which I mean those that do not believe freedom, liberty, life, the pursuit of happiness is equally available to all of us and should be. Overwhelming majority of resources are put into women's spaces or perceived to be women's spaces. And then the last kind of tidbit I'd add to that is if we're talking online, right? If you say something in online content that is quite literally anti CCP, anti Shein, anti Timu, right? Temu, whatever the hell you want to call it, anti-TikTok. Um, you will have 89% you will have 89% less organic reach, right? And it will take 6.8 times longer, basically, for you to reach 11% of the audience that somebody who either said nothing or was pro, right? If everything else is the same, if you use the same hashtags, all of that, like there is so much to this. And there's been so much investment in this space because the way that we communicate is different and it's not this linear way that you've laid out. Um, and I don't know, um, I get worried when I hear, I worry that as important and necessary as the linear way of approaching information operations is, so is the other ways, whatever this way is. And there's more than two ways, right? We need all the ways. I am a firm believer in that there are very few wrong ways to do this work. Um, and at this point, we are not doing enough of it to like have a strong opinion to be like, no, you shouldn't do that. Do you know what I mean? Like prove me that it's hurting. Prove to me that it is hurting before I tell you to stop doing it.
Well, I mean, one thing, and New York Times kind of wrapping up here, but one thing that I've kind of often reflected on, that particularly in around like the info operations that have occurred around like Russia's full-scale invasion or in the aftermath of that, was actually the unleashing of a lot of just innovation and creativity from Ukraine particularly. And I've like looked at this particularly, that like the info operations that were coming out of Ukraine were far superior to those coming out of the US when they were, or US directed ones. And some of it, there are a lot of factors in it and it's hard to understand. But like one thing that, you know, has been pretty evident is there's just much more creativity and latitude for doing things. And some of the things failed, of course, but they tried stuff and they just like went out and did it. And it was kind of like, I think I was asked by someone, was like, oh, what do you think makes the difference there? It's just like experimentation, just allowing people to go out and do things. And as there are reasons, of course, the U.S. government's going to be risk averse in this space on it, and it is what it is, and we're not going to change that. However, if the U.S. government ever wants to do it, they're fundamentally going to have to like change the whole structure around it, because they're not going to really allow that real experimentation. But we have a broader ecosystem. It's not just all US government operators out there. So maybe they won't have
Right. And
to.
we talked about this and like we are now at the very end, so you have to have me come back, me and some other women to come back and talk about this because like you just opened a whole other can of 6 hours worth of worms. Um because this is so, yeah, I mean, this has only so much to do with the US government. And the other thing I will say about Ukraine is that I don't know that there's more creativity there. I think when somebody's got their boot on your neck and you're about to die, the rules change, right? These are people who are fighting for their life. It's been a long time since the United States of America has felt that fear. It's been a long time, thank God, since most Americans have felt that. Human ingenuity knows no bounds. I do not believe in eugenics. Therefore, I do not believe that there is something inherently more creative in a Ukrainian than an American. I believe that the environment that Ukrainians are living in right now has forced them to put their creativity on full display. And thank God they're doing so. I think yeah, I agree with you with the caveat of saying like I don't think that they're more creative or less creative than Americans. I don't think borders work that way. I think it's just like when you're about to die, um, you know, whether or not how this is going to look to everyone else becomes less important because you may not be around to deal with the mess after.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's like, and that was one of the, also, they unleashed civil society into the
Right.
space, and that was a
Yes.
big part of it as well.
It's
It
a huge
wasn't,
thing, right? It's a whole of society response. Yeah, because everybody could die.
yeah.
Wild, scary
So,
times.
but yeah, well, let's
Yeah,
have you back on and talk about that at some point. Anyway, but and
happy
it
to.
just feels like criminal that this was such a short conversation.
I know this was so short. I'm sorry, friends, but yes. Anytime you want to talk about the past, present, future of the US Information Agency and what it could be, should be, and whether it should exist again as someone, who dreams both in and out of it. I don't know. I mean, like,
I think that's a
woof.
super interesting question, and it's like one
Yeah.
of those, like, I really don't know which direction the Trump administration
Yeah.
is gonna go on it. They're they could actually do some things that, like, transform it in good ways. They could equally do some things that just turn it into a dumpster fire.
Dumpster fires do create warmth, but in our experience, burn pits create cancer. So really either way, right?
Yeah, well, there's risks
We'll
everywhere, I
find
guess.
out.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Anyway, this has been a
in a
lot of
situation
fun.
where everybody
Yeah,
dies.
yeah.
Yeah, this
So
was great. Thank you so much for having
oh,
me.
you're about to put you're working on a book, you're, like, really out there.
Um,
How can people, you do podcasts,
I
how can
do a podcast,
tell
yeah.
tell people how they can listen to you more.
Yeah, if what you want is more of this, you can find me, I exist on the internet, under the name non-state actress. I'm on Substack. I'm also now on YouTube and Instagram. I will be in many, many more places, and in those places more and more in the coming months, which is really exciting. And I hope, knock on wood, there's wood around me. The book will be of the same name, non-state actress, national security, but not boring, will be out in the next year or so. So, we just have to, like I said, live that long.
Yeah. Alright, well, it's been wonderful. Wonderful to have you on.